Minister Fraser, thanks for joining us this morning.
A pleasure to be with you, as always.
Has the government created a program that's no longer fair to all Canadians?
Oh, I would disagree with that assessment. What we set out to do was to advance measures that were going to do two things. One was reduce pollution, and two was to save people money. By addressing the situation around home heating oil, which is a terrible source of pollution and extremely expensive, we're going to be able to make a meaningful difference for people right across the country. Though it may have a disproportionate impact on home heating oil users in Atlantic Canada, there are hundreds of thousands of people right across the country who use this polluting source of fuel, and we've made a decision to try to get rid of it altogether, and that could save households literally thousands of dollars every year, regardless of which region of the country you live in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a difference between recognizing that home heating oil is not good for the environment and pausing the carbon tax entirely for 3 years. Why did you go down that road instead of increasing the rebate, for instance, or just providing more money for people in Atlantic Canada to be able to pay their bills?
Well, I think there's a good reason for this. So there's a couple different elements to the policies that we've rolled out. The key piece is to replace home heating oil with heat pumps, which is where the big money saver is going to come from. But when the government has made the decision to pull the solution out of the market by directly intervening and covering the cost of heat pumps for low-income families and giving cost-free loans to everyone else to adopt this technology, there's no longer a need for a pricing mechanism to create that incentive, because the incentive is created directly through government action. Over the course of the next 3 years, there will be a pause, which we think will give enough time for the uptake of the new technology to reduce pollution and to accrue those savings at a household level. And when you solve the problem a different way, there's not necessarily a need to use the market-based pricing mechanism, which I still support and defended in the House of Commons for years, because we found a different way to solve the problem much more quickly.
Yeah, I guess it just for people that have had to deal with the carbon tax since your government put it in place, though, they're starting to wonder if it is indeed really the answer, if the government even believes it's the answer, if you're willing to make an exception for part of the country and nowhere else.
Well, the reason that it makes a sense when it comes to home heating oil is because we can completely get rid of it, and you see those environmental and financial savings. If you look at other sources of fuel, natural gas, for example, the average annual cost is significantly less. So if you actually create an incentive to transition from a natural gas furnace to a heat pump, for example, you don't see the same environmental impact as the transition from a home heating oil furnace to a heat pump, nor do you see the financial savings. So the same policy wouldn't make sense to apply to different sources of fuel.
And I recognize that it does apply across the country, but as you probably well know, StatsCan says 3% of Canadian households used home heating oil in 2021, and the vast majority of them, as also you well know, in Atlantic Canada. I think the number in your province, for instance, is 41%. So it does appear to people, I'm sure you recognize this, as though there is a preferential treatment happening for Atlantic Canada, and that it may be for purely political reasons. What do you say to that?
Look, I disagree with that characterization, perhaps obviously, though I will be the first to acknowledge that Atlantic Canada disproportionately uses home heating oil. There are hundreds of thousands of homes outside of Atlantic Canada, notably Quebec and Ontario, but in every part of the country that do use home heating oil. But one thing that's important to understand about Canada is every policy the federal government adopts is going to have a unique impact on different regions in Canada. We have a heavy fishery, and of course we get more money in Atlantic Canada for small craft harbors. In Western Canada, we put hundreds of millions of dollars to clean up orphaned oil wells, which didn't necessarily help Atlantic Canadians, but that was the right thing to do. When it comes to investments in the auto sector or EV battery factories, Quebec and Ontario tend to disproportionately benefit. And I think it's okay if we recognize that some policies have a disproportionately positive impact on some regions of the country, and those who live in other parts of the country can still recognize that's a good thing.
Perhaps, but it is a nationwide carbon tax. It is not, the policy here is your policy, and it's supposed to apply nationwide. And I know you're saying that it does, but it is an outsized benefit to Atlantic Canada. There's a reason why all the Atlantic MPs were standing behind the Prime Minister when he made the announcement, and no one from Quebec was.
Yeah, one of the things that we've heard from our constituents over the last number of months was not just in respect of a price on pollution, by the way, but there has been a rapid increase in the market on the price of home heating oil that needed to be addressed. affordability is a national concern, but we can tackle different aspects of the affordability challenges that families are facing. But when we have an opportunity to rapidly reduce pollution from a very heavy source of fuel, home heating oil, and we know that the outcome of transitioning to a clean economy is going to result in thousands of dollars every year for households who use that dirty source of fuel, it created an opportunity for us to intervene in a way that wouldn't make sense for different sources of fuel. So I certainly wouldn't think it would be appropriate to not move forward with a good idea purely because it's going to disproportionately benefit one part of the country. If it's a good idea, it's worth pursuing.
But I talked to New Brunswick's Premier Blaine Higgs, who obviously is benefiting from this program. But he says that he is looking to get some legal opinions on whether he has to implement the carbon tax at all, because he doesn't believe in it. What happens if he doesn't do that? Scott Moe is saying the same thing. What if this means that provinces decide they're just not going to go ahead with this if they don't believe in it?
Well, that is a completely different question altogether than the appropriateness of the policy. We expect that everyone in Canada is going to follow the law, in particular, governments at different levels. If we have governments who assert that they're not required to follow the law, the very principle behind our democracy, the rule of law, the idea that no one is above the law, falls apart. And that is a far more serious challenge than any one given policy on the environment or the economy. If we erode the belief that governments are subject to the law, we will become the kind of country that we seek to reform in other parts of the world. It's essential that we all agree that once the laws are adopted, whether they are the laws that we would have chosen for ourselves, that we agree to follow them. That's the very principle that underpins democracy, and we can't, on a willy-nilly basis, erode the rule of law, a fundamental principle to democracy on which the Federation rests.
I'll just end on this question, Minister. Do you think that this policy change will save seats in Atlantic Canada for the Liberal Party?
What I'm more interested in is saving money for my constituents. This is going to save money for people, and to the extent that people choose to vote accordingly, I will leave to them. My sense is if you adopt good policies that help people and address the concerns that they raise with you, they'll keep you in mind when it comes to the next election. But the motivation here is to serve the interests of families who are having a tough time when it comes to the cost of living, but also continue to accelerate the pace of change by more rapidly transitioning away from home heating oil. And if we can protect the environment and save people money with any policy, I'm going to be supportive of it.